Hello class, this is Chapter 14, Emergency Operations. This chapter provides an overview of the considerations firefighters need to make when operating at different types of emergencies. It discusses the implications and relationship between firefighter safety and decision-making at the incident scene. The objectives we're going to cover in this chapter include the following. We will identify the personnel who might be working at an emergency scene, list the 16 firefighter life safety initiatives, identify important considerations when working at a structure fire. We will identify important considerations when working at an electrical distribution equipment fire. We will also identify important considerations when working at a wildland fire, identify important considerations when working at a wildland/urban interface fire, identify important considerations when working at a petroleum fire, and identify important considerations when working at a hazardous materials incident. Further, we will identify important considerations when working at weapons of mass destruction incidents, identify important considerations when working with emergency medical service operations, and identify important considerations for highway incident safety. We will also identify important considerations when working at vehicle accidents, identify important considerations when working at an aircraft fire, identify important considerations when working at a technical rescue incident, and discuss the importance of decision-making skills and how they relate to incident safety. The personnel resources of the fire department can be divided into two general areas: operations, also known as line, and support, also known as staff. The operational personnel resources of the fire department consist of the people in the fire stations and their supervisors. Operations/line personnel are the personnel charged with response to and the mitigation of incidents. One of the fundamental roles of the fire department is to respond to emergencies. Not every incident is an emergency, and not every emergency is the responsibility of the fire department to manage. In many types of incidents, the fire department does what it can in light of its legal and resource limitations. A well-trained firefighter should be able to deal with most types of emergency situations. You may not be trained in a particular incident type, but many of the basic rules apply and can be used as a guide to action in unusual situations. In this chapter, you are expected to take all you have learned throughout this course and put it all together. That is how, of course, it happens in the real world of emergency response. All your skills, knowledge, and abilities get tested at real incidents. After studying this chapter, look back at the 16 firefighter life safety initiatives and review what you have learned from this course. Then consider the numerous things that could have gone wrong in these examples. In addition, reflect on what has gone wrong in past incidents, costing civilians and firefighters their lives. Those are valuable, although tragic, lessons to be learned. The type of personnel who can be expected to respond to an incident depends on the incident type. The fire department has its own specialists, just as other fields, such as medicine, have their own specialists. These personnel have been trained in dealing with special incident types as well as regular fire department functions, such as firefighting and medical aid. The fire department is not the only agency that shows up at an incident that has a say in determining the objectives, strategy, and tactics to be used. An example is figure 14-1 below. Law enforcement and other public agencies assist and sometimes are in command of incidents in which the fire department is involved. The number of representatives from other agencies may outnumber the firefighters in some types of incidents. An incident of this type would be managed using unified command. The first objective of any incident is to provide for responder and public safety. This objective applies to all responders. In 2004, the National Fallen Firefighter Foundation, or NFFF, examined the causes of line of duty firefighter deaths. As a result of this meeting, they put forth the 16 firefighter life safety initiatives to be followed by all firefighters. The 16 initiatives are: A. Define and advocate the need for a cultural change within the fire service relating to safety, incorporating leadership, management, supervision, accountability, and personal responsibility. B. Enhance the personal and organizational accountability for health and safety throughout the fire service. C. Focus greater attention on the integration of risk management with incident management at all levels, including strategic, tactical, and planning responsibilities. D. All firefighters must be empowered to stop unsafe practices. E. Develop and implement national standards for training, qualifications, and certification, including regular recertification, that are equally applicable to all firefighters based on the duties they are expected to perform. F. Develop and implement national, medical, and physical fitness standards that are equally applicable to all firefighters based on the duties they are expected to perform. G. Create a national research agenda and data collection system that relates to the initiatives. H. Utilize available technology whenever it can produce higher levels of health and safety. Thoroughly investigate all firefighter fatalities, injuries, and near misses. J. Grant programs should support the implementation of safe practices and/or mandate safe practices as an eligibility requirement. K. National standards for emergency response policies and procedures should be developed and championed. L. National protocols for response to violent incidents should be developed and championed. M. Firefighters and their families must have access to counseling and psychological support. N. Public education must receive more resources and be championed as critical fire and life safety programs. O. Advocacy must be strengthened for the enforcement of codes and the installation of home fire sprinklers. P. Safety must be a primary consideration in the design of apparatus and equipment. 4. In terms of practical application of the 16 firefighter life safety initiatives that we just reviewed, every firefighter should adhere to the following. A. Duty and responsibility. Under that should fall making every day a training day so that everyone goes home safely and in a collected fashion. Next, firefighter maintenance programs should be in place. These include receiving regular medical checkups, getting regular exercise, and eating in a healthy manner. Now there are rehabilitation guidelines. Stop before you drop, stay hydrated, and monitor vital signs. By rehab guidelines, we're not talking about drug rehab, for goodness sake. What we're talking about is physical rehabilitation in the sense that, for example, stop before you drop. Know your limitations. Know when you're at the point of exhaustion so that you can be proactive and stop whatever it is you're doing to overtax yourself and take steps to prevent you from overdoing and overtaxing your body. Make sure that when you are passengers, when responding to incidents, wear your full PPE, get in the apparatus, sit down, fasten your seatbelt, and ride with drivers who will get you there in one piece. Now, drivers, when responding to incidents, make sure that you remember this is not a race. Safe is more important than fast. Stop at all red lights and stop signs, and if others do not pull over, don't run them over. There are, for instance, drivers who are legal to drive, but who are deaf, and they may or may not see your red lights and wigwags. So, and they certainly aren't going to hear them. So give drivers the benefit of the doubt. They may or may not be able to hear you. And so don't mow them down. Don't get frustrated and angry with them. Accept the fact that they simply may not hear you. And while they are better at scanning overall than the average driver, they still are at somewhat of a disadvantage. So make sure that you stop at all red lights and stop signs. And if others do not pull over, remember, don't run them over. Now, as far as interior firefighting, work as a team, stay together, stay oriented, manage your air supply, and take the proper tools with you for any interior operation. Every member should have a radio, provide constant updates, and constantly assess for risk versus benefit. Now, rapid intervention teams. The assignment of one or more companies as rapid intervention crews, or RICs, at working incidents provides the ability to initiate a rescue effort immediately to locate, rescue, or assist firefighters who are in trouble at the scene of an incident. Also, these are referred to as rapid intervention companies or teams, RITs. RIC members should be standing by wearing their full protective clothing with SCBA ready for immediate use. They should have forcible entry tools, rescue rope, and any other equipment that could be needed quickly. At hazardous materials incidents or other situations where special protective equipment is required, the RIC should be ready with the same level of protective clothing and equipment that the entry team requires. Some departments have established firefighter assist and search teams to accomplish rapid intervention tasks. Remember the rule 2 in, 2 out. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, has created a regulation commonly referred to as 2 in, 2 out. This regulation specifies that the procedures of 2 in, 2 out must be used whenever personnel are operating in atmospheres that require SCBA. This especially applies to incidents where atmospheres are described as immediately dangerous to life and health, IDLH. OSHA recognizes that, quote, conditions present during advanced interior structural fire create an IDLH atmosphere, unquote. OSHA states that this applies to fire scenes that have gone, quote unquote, beyond the ignition stage. In other words, fires in the free burning, flashover, or decay stages. Let's talk about 2 in, 2 out. If a department with 1, 2, or 3 personnel wishes to initiate interior fire attack when an IDLH atmosphere is likely present, the engine company personnel must first alter the IDLH atmosphere. An exception is an interior attack with fewer than 4 personnel at the scene can be made if there is a high probability of effecting a rescue or stopping the fire from threatening persons in imminent danger. Personnel operating in hazardous areas must operate in 2-person teams called the buddy system. This is required to be in communication with each other at all times, either visually or by voice contact. However, contact by radio does not meet the requirement of direct contact. Backup team members are also required to maintain either visual or voice contact as well. Of the 4 personnel at a scene when operating in IDLH or potentially IDLH atmosphere, the entry team must consist of a minimum of 2 personnel. One of those 2 personnel who remains outside may be engaged in other activities as long as this does not jeopardize the firefighter's safety and the individual's ability to participate in any rescue operation. Now let's do a little overview. One of the basic responsibilities of any fire department is fighting structure fires, an example of which below is 14-2. The equipment in the form of pumpers, hose, and nozzles is designed with this primarily in mind. Previously, this was the type of emergency work that firefighters performed the most. This is no longer true with the move of the fire department into medical aid delivery. It is still one of the most important jobs performed. Most departments spend the bulk of their time and training budget preparing for this one aspect of emergency service. A fire department that can keep its structure losses to a minimum is performing an important part of its function very well. Every once in a while, there is bound to be a fire that exceeds the control capabilities of the fire department and its resources. When this happens, the public is sure to take a close look at the fire department and its budget and ask whether the money is being used effectively. Firefighting operations at structure fires take one of 2 modes, offensive or defensive. In the offensive mode, the firefighters enter the burning structure and attack the seat of the fire. In the defensive mode, the water is applied through windows or into other openings to control the fire. Note that hose streams should not be directed through ventilation openings when the resources are inside the structure. In some cases, the initial attack is made through a window to darken down the fire, and then the firefighters enter and complete the extinguishment. If the firefighters are able to enter the structure upon arrival, a primary search is made for victims. A firefighting operation at a structure must be a coordinated attack. The first arriving unit sizes up the fire and decides which methods will be the most effective in bringing the fire under control. Hose lines are pulled and charged, and the power is cut off at the electrical meter. Ventilation is performed. One of the most important questions firefighters responding to a structure fires must ask, regardless of what kind of structure is involved, is, what are the contents? In the past, people were not as likely to have an assortment of household chemicals stored in structures, and firefighting was somewhat safer. An example below of dangerous chemicals that have evolved over recent years are shown here in figure 14-4, one of which is Roundup, which is a known carcinogen. In fact, it's a dioxin, and it's very dangerous. And several of those. Acetone is certainly an accelerant. It's flammable, paint thinner. So there are a lot of more dangerous chemicals that have evolved over the years that are much more likely to be found in households than, say, even as late as 30 years ago. To limit exposure to these items, firefighters have better protective equipment. Because of improvements to protective equipment, firefighters sometimes think they are invincible, which is certainly not the case. An SCBA will protect you from inhaling chemicals, but will not protect you from skin contact. In hot structure fires where you are sweating profusely, all of the pores of your skin will be open, making you vulnerable to contamination. You will suffer an exposure if chemicals that can penetrate the skin come into contact with an unprotected area. Many of these chemicals do not show immediate effects, but cause cancer and other medical issues decades later. Leather gloves and boots will protect you from some hazards and not from others. They are made of animal skin, which, like your own skin, is porous. If your gloves or boots become contaminated with a harmful chemical, they cannot. Interior structural components pose dangers as well. Suspended ceilings have crashed down and trapped firefighters in their framing, concealed wirings, and ductwork. Ceiling fans, which are heavy, can fall down and strike you, and tall bookcases and high piled stock can be knocked down by hose streams and land on firefighters. As the situation of a structural fire deteriorates, interior stairs can become very dangerous. They can act as a chimney for smoke and flame and cut off your escape, trapping you above the fire. It can be easy to fall down them in heavy smoke and dark conditions. The fire can also weaken the stairs that you went up so that when you come back down, they may collapse, dropping you into a raging inferno. Curtains hanging over a window that you are using as an emergency escape route can become wrapped around you and explode into flame in a flashover situation. Structural collapse is one of the firefighters' worst nightmares. One example you see below is 14-5. A floor or a roof above you can collapse and land on you, pinning you down until you run out of air or burned to death. The floor or roof you are standing on can fail, dropping you into the fire below. Many types of modern buildings use this truss roof construction, and older construction utilized the bowstring truss type of roof construction. Both of these types can fail dramatically when exposed to fire. Parapet walls and overhangs have a history of falling onto firefighters. Even whole walls have fallen in, burying firefighters and equipment in the rubble. As you walk around a burning structure, do not walk upright in front of windows. If you happen to be in front of a window at the time that the fire backdrafts, you will get burned. Hose lines inside the structure are quite capable of blowing the glass out of a window and cutting you badly. It is also dangerous to walk under ladders, as someone above you could drop tools or break glass which may fall on you. A type of structure fire that is becoming more common is the clandestine drug lab or meth lab that has caught fire. The people preparing the drugs usually set up the operation, start the process, and then often leave for the period of time it takes to cook. They may have even booby-trapped the area. Should you arrive at this type of incident, isolate and deny entry. Remember, it is a hazmat site. And just like all hazmat sites, you isolate and deny entry. This is no different. Confine the fire to the smallest possible area while still making a defensive attack. Do not enter the structure yourself and do not touch anything. Law enforcement has access to specially trained persons who handle this particular type of incident. Not all of the hazards at a structure fire are on the inside. Heavy roof loads in the form of air conditioning units and other equipment often crash down when the structure is weakened by fire, and an example is 14-6 that you see below. Chimneys also pose the same hazard. A television antenna can act as a spear if it comes through the roof and pins you to the floor. And believe it or not, people do still have television antennas, or they have ham radio antennas. Quite a few people have those. So be prepared for any types of antenna that you may see on the roof. Not just television, but there are a wide variety of antennas that are available that can act as spears. To protect yourself, always wear your full PPE and remain alert for anything out of the ordinary. If a fire resists normal extinguishment methods, it may mean that there is some type of unusual fuel involved. Flame and smoke colors are an indicator. Normal structure fires burn with a reddish orange to yellow flame and black smoke. The flames are dark orange, blue, green, or some other color, then there is something going on that you should be extra careful of. Reddish or other unusual color smoke also indicates that something is out of the ordinary, so be suspicious. Identify any irregular activity upon arrival, such as the state of windows or doors that appear to be blown out of the structure. Look for dubious individuals on scene, such as someone running down the street away from the fire with a gas can in his hand. Leave yourself a second way out. Before entering a structure, try to locate an alternate opening. Make sure there is another way out if the fire gets out of control and cuts off the path through which you entered. When working on a roof above a fire, there should always be enough ladders placed for all of the personnel to make a quick escape. If firefighters are going upstairs, ladders should be placed at windows so they can escape without using the stairs. And above all, do not freelance. Stay with your company and your officer. Always fall back on your training. Your officer has much more firefighting experience than you do and is more likely to recognize a bad situation developing before you do. By staying together, firefighters can help each other out, especially if one becomes trapped. Someone should always know where you have gone. If you are missing, it is better that someone recognizes that fact right away and not after returning to the station. High-rise firefighting presents a whole list of additional hazards to the structural firefighter. Each individual floor may be rented to different occupants and can have its own unique layout according to the tenant's wishes, making it easy to become disoriented. Take a quick tour of the floor below the fire floor to get an idea of the layout before entering the fire floor itself. The interior walls on each floor are often nothing more than partitions ending at the suspended ceiling. Above the ceiling, the fire can run freely across the hidden attic space above your head. You cannot see the fire in this space, and it may come out between you and your escape route. The best way to access a high-rise fire is up the stairways. However, this can be problematic when the fire is on the 50th floor of the building. One alternative is to take the elevator to the floor below the fire and to use the stairs from there. This requires being absolutely sure which floor the fire is on. The elevators can be used if they are the type that open at a sky lobby below the fire. The way you will not end up with the door opening onto an inferno. However, if you pay attention to signs in elevators, 99% of them will tell you, do not use elevators in the event of a fire. I cannot say with highest enough recommendation, do not do so. The only people allowed access to elevators in a fire are trained fire personnel with a special set of keys. They are very well trained in how to operate an elevator and educated as to where they're most likely to encounter fire in terms of an elevator. So just whatever is taught right here, please take my solid advice and just do not use an elevator during a fire. There are systems available on some elevators that allow firefighters to override their automatic functions. This is what I was just mentioning. If this system is installed and the firefighters are familiar with how it works, it is another option. And an example of this is 14-7, as you see below. And if you've ever paid attention to the buttons on an elevator, you've seen fire keys and special call keys, etc. And these are systems that allow firefighters access and options to use elevators during a fire where civilian population are not allowed. In high-rise fire situations, one of the exterior hazards is, of course, falling glass. And this is an example of that you see below figure 14-8. And I just happen to know that this fire took place in Los Angeles. This was a very dangerous fire. And most of today's high-rise buildings have glass exteriors. Where there's a fire, these glass panels have a tendency to fall out or get knocked out by occupants or by firefighters, affecting ventilation. A large piece of glass falling from far above the street is capable of severing hose lines and injuring firefighters. Pieces of glass have the ability to sail quite far as they fall. And the old adage of the bigger it is, the harder it falls is true. At some point, that piece of glass is going to really reach terminal velocity, which is 9.8 meters per second squared, which is as fast as it can possibly go. And it will cause immense, if not catastrophic, damage. So please make sure that you are well away from any possibility of falling glass. It says here that no one should be standing out in the open within 200 feet of a building that's on fire if possible. If available, it is best to enter using underground access to the structure, and that goes for firefighters. Of course, that's true. You want to absolutely enter the safest way possible, and underground is definitely going to be the safest way, because as fire bursts out glass, occupants may burst out glass, etc. So underground is the preferred method of egress. Now let's talk about electrical hazards. Electricity is almost always a hazard in structure fires. One of the first tasks at a structure fire is to cut off the power to the structure. You should never try to pull the electrical meter, as it can explode in your face, showering you with glass. There is no guarantee that the power is off, even when someone has cut the switch or main breaker to the structure. The lines can stay charged. This is especially true in multifamily, commercial, and industrial occupancies. If the occupants are stealing electricity, they may have wired around the meter. So that's another hazard to be aware of, especially at a clandestine meth lab. They may be stealing electricity, and they may have rigged some strange kind of wiring, and so that is something to absolutely be very cautious of and definitely be aware of. If you must walk through a darkened area, it is best to put your arms up with your palms towards you. This prevents you from reflexively grabbing an energized electrical wire if you contact one. Make sure the apparatus is not parked beneath overhead wires connected to burning structures. They often come disconnected and can fall across the apparatus. Jump clear and do not touch the apparatus if a wire comes down onto the apparatus. Anytime you see a wire, consider it a live wire. Just because a wire is not arcing and jumping does not mean that it is not live. Wires can also burn off and fall across metal fences such as chain link, energizing them. There are numerous electrical safety videos available online. Look for one put out by an energy company like Duke Power, Edison, etc. One of the cardinal rules of raising ladders of any type is to absolutely look up first. Make sure you are not raising your ladder into an electrical wire or near an electrical wire. Sometimes wires can give off an electrical field and shock you, even though the ladder has not come into direct contact with the wire itself. So definitely be aware of all hazards associated with wires or proximity to wires. A wooden ladder will not conduct electricity as well as an aluminum one, but they can both kill you in the right situation. Your rubber boots contain carbon and are not electrical insulators. Carbon burns. Carbon is a fossil fuel. Coal is carbon. So carbon burns. It is not an electrical insulator. Pike poles are also not to be used for moving electrical wires. They may be resistive when they're new, but as they get older and build up carbon on the handles, the resistance is lowered. Do not attempt to cut wires with bolt cutters. Do not attempt to cut wires with bolt cutters. The only people who are fully trained and carry the required equipment to deal with electric wires and equipment are people from the power company or the utilities themselves. Now, as far as pets are concerned, a hazard that most people do not stop to consider at a structure fire is pets. Dogs can launch themselves at you when opening the door or gate to a home. And some people keep exotic pets such as rattlesnakes in their homes. Why, I do not know, but they do. And they are highly dangerous, especially in a fire situation where they're panicked. Dogs will panic, horses will panic, cats, snakes, you name it. All creatures are inherently terrified of fire, and rightly so, and it literally is part of every creature's genetic makeup, just about every land-roaming mammal or animal. So definitely be aware of the fact that assume that there are animals until you know otherwise, and assume that they are going to launch at you out of fear until you know for a fact that there is not an animal that's going to launch at you. Also, livestock can pose a hazard to firefighters in certain situations. Cows weigh a lot, and a stampeding cow will kill you. So please be very cautious if you're answering a rural call where you've got horses or cows, bulls, etc. In some situations, your PPE may help to prevent injury. Your best defense is always a cautious approach. Now let's talk about fire department operations at sprinkled occupancies. The three principal causes of unsatisfactory sprinkler performance include A, a closed valve in the water supply line, B, delivery of inadequate water supply to the system, C, occupancy changes that render the installed sprinkler system unsuitable, and then also these can be prevented through effective pre-incident planning and the implementation of testing and maintenance programs. So if you're going to have a sprinkler system, test it. Periodically test it. Test it at random. For example, this seems unrelated, but it's not. For instance, on a submarine or an aircraft carrier, they do drills after drill after drill after drill because they need to make sure that these highly complex systems are working, and if something fails to work, they can take actions in the circumstances to help mitigate the circumstances that they're presented with. So practice makes perfect, and just like in any complex system, sprinkled systems are one of those systems. Definitely test and practice unplanned and planned to make sure that you mitigate unforeseen circumstances and that you're testing properly and maintaining your systems and programs properly. Departments should establish standard operating procedures for operations at sprinkled or standpiped occupancies. One of the first actions to be taken is to ensure the supply to the system is boosted through the use of a pumper attached to the fire department connection. All of the system's valves should be checked to ensure they are in the fully open position unless they are marked closed for maintenance. This is not the case for residential systems. They are designed to handle only normal pressures provided by the water main system. Once flow from the system is ensured, hose lines can be advanced to the seat of the fire. Do not turn off the system to enhance visibility before the fire is confirmed to be under control. When a part of the system must be turned off for overhaul of salvage operations, try to turn off only the portion of the system in the affected area. The system should be placed back into service immediately before leaving the scene. If the system cannot be placed back into service, the property owner or representative should be notified. After any fire-caused sprinkler system activation, an investigation as to the cause should be conducted and a report on the system's effectiveness should be written. A full list of the components of this type of investigation are contained in NFPA 13E. This is the recommended practice for fire department operations in properties protected by sprinkler and standpipe systems. Now let's do a little overview. Areas that require careful pre-planning and consideration are electrical substations and vaults, and an example that you see below is 14-9. This is the result of fire and electrical equipment. What you can see here is a transformer that has burned out. They are a hazard from a safety standpoint because of the high potential for getting electrocuted. Just because it's burned and been in a fire does not mean it is not live. Do not ever make that assumption. It is also possible that indiscriminate use of water or dry chemical extinguisher could cause much more damage than the fire itself would. A more common fire is the power pole fire. Since water can conduct electricity, it is better to use a fog pattern or short bursts of water when extinguishing electrical equipment. This lessens the chances of getting electrocuted. Most transformers containing polychlorinated biphenyl PCB oil have been phased out. PCB oil is carcinogenic, but some of these transformers may still be in use. As a general rule, firefighters should not enter or extinguish fires in electrical distribution equipment or installations unless guided by electrical company employees. These personnel are trained and know where it is safe to operate and which firefighting technique should be applied. They know which switches to throw and which switches to shut down the power. Once the power is shut down, a Class C fire reverts to Class A, B, D, or K. In wildland firefighting operations, the basic methods of extinguishment are to apply water or fire retardant to the fire edge, to create a fire break or control line around the perimeter, and you see examples of both below in figure 14-10. This is done with a variety of methods. In grasslands, pumpers can be used to make a direct attack on the fire edge itself. Crews using hand tools can also create a scratch line that breaks the fuel's continuity and stops the fire spread. Dozers are often used in the very same manner. In heavier fuels, because of radiated heat and flame lengths, a direct attack is not possible. In these fuels, crews get well ahead of the fire and make an indirect attack, creating fire breaks with hand crews and dozers. Natural barriers like lakes and roads are also used as part of the fire break. When Class A foam is available, it can be used to protect exposures by applying it as a wetting agent to raise the surface fuel moisture to where it will not burn. A method often used to create a safe, quote-unquote, black line is to backfire. The backfire removes the fuel between the control line and the head of the advancing fire. The backfire burns back toward the main fire and away from the control line. The 10 standard firefighting orders are: 1. Keep informed on fire weather conditions and forecasts. 2. Know what your fire is doing at all times. C. Base all actions on current and expected behavior of the fire. Next, identify escape routes and safety zones and make them known. Next, post lookouts where there is possible danger. Next, be alert, stay calm, think clearly, and act decisively. Next, maintain prompt communication with your forces, your supervisor, and adjoining forces. Next, give clear instructions and be sure they are understood. A good tip for this is give a set of instructions, have them repeat those instructions back to you. That way you know that they are clear on exactly what you've ordered. Next, maintain control of your forces at all times and fight fire aggressively, but provide for safety first always. The 18 situations that shout watch out are: A. The fire is not scouted and sized up. B. You are in country not seen in daylight. C. Safety zones and escape routes are not identified. D. You are unfamiliar with the weather and local factors influencing fire behavior. E. You are uninformed on strategy, tactics, and hazards. F. Instructions and assignments are not clear. G. There is no communication link with crew members and or supervisor. H. You are constructing a line without a safe anchor point. I. You are constructing a fire line downhill with fire below. J. You are attempting a frontal assault on the fire. K. There's an unburned fuel between you and the fire. L. You cannot see the main end of the fire and are not in contact with anyone who can. M. You are on a hillside where rolling material can ignite fuel below. N. The weather is getting hotter and drier. And O. The wind increases and or changes direction. P. You are getting frequent spot fires across the line. Q. Terrain and fuels make escape to safety zones difficult. R. You feel like taking a nap near the fire line. 10. All of these listed orders and situations were developed because someone was seriously injured or killed, and thus, sadly, lessons were learned the hard way. In recent incidents where wildland firefighters were injured or killed, violations of these orders and situations were found to be contributing factors. The four most common causative factors involved in tragedy and near-miss wildland fires are A. Small fires or deceptively quiet sectors of large fires. B. Bright fuels such as grass or brush. C. An unexpected shift in the wind direction or speed. And D. Fires running uphill. Now let's talk about the acronym LCES. Because it is very hard to memorize the 10 standard firefighting orders and all of the 18 situations that shall watch out, 2 or more condensed safety messages have been adopted. The first of these messages is LCES. The first L is lookouts. Lookouts should always be posted to keep an eye on the fire and on the weather. C is for communications. This must be maintained between the lookouts and the crews working between the crews and their leader, and between the leader and the adjoining crews, and between the crew leaders and the command personnel. E is escape routes. These should always be planned and communicated to all of the crew members in case of a change in fire behavior and must provide access to a safety zone. And then S is safety zones. These should be placed as often as necessary. They must be large enough to accommodate all of the crews in the area in case of a burnover. And they need to be spaced closely enough so that the crew has time to reach them if the fire dictates that they must seek refuge. It must be clearly indicated and accessible. FLCES Delta is what we're going to talk about now. FLCES Delta is a term that is a modified version of LCES as termed by Brad Mayhew, who is a former hotshot firefighter within the U.S. Forest Service. The F stands for fire behavior, which is to prompt you to think of the worst case scenario. Next, firefighters may respond to an incident that is fairly commonplace, and then it escalates into something much worse, such as a trash bin fire that turns out to contain hazardous materials. To protect ourselves from the extraordinary happening during the ordinary, we need to be sure that we are trained, equipped, and led appropriately. This includes looking out for ourselves as well as others. The elements of the safety LCES should be in place prior to engaging in any incident, regardless of type. For example, at the scene of a structure fire, the lookout is the IC or his or her designee remaining outside the fire structure to observe any changes to the structure or to the fire intensity. The communications is the link between the exterior and the interior, either by radio or other voice communication. The escape route is the path of egress off of the roof or out of the structure altogether. The safety zone is the safe area outside the structure, clear of smoke and falling debris. The Greek letter delta signifies change. Fire occurs in an ever-changing environment. Firefighters need to pay attention to what is changing and at the time and what may change in the future. The personnel assigned to the incident are changing as well by becoming fatigued, bored, or even overconfident. All of this must be reviewed constantly in context of the LCES that is in place. Is the LCES that was put into place at the onset of the attack still valid? If not, why not, and what can be done to bring it into compliance? Everyone assigned to the incident needs to pay attention to the situation and be focused, alert, and vocal if something does not look right. Remember that information is what drives decision making. The information must be gathered and considered and appropriate action taken to respond to it. The last step in any decision-making process is to reevaluate. Once the response to the change occurs, it must be reevaluated again. Look up, look down, and look around. The second of the condensed safety messages, look up, look down, and look around, is as follows. A, look up before you start to work and every so often while working. Observe what the wind, smoke, and fire are doing. B, look down. Make sure to watch your footing. At night, it is easy to become blinded from the light of the fire and walk into holes or fall from drop-offs. Logs and pipes in tall grass can easily trip you, which could be disastrous when carrying a razor-sharp Pulaski. Next, look downhill and be sure that the fire has not hooked around or been ignited by rolling material below your position. The light from the moon can illuminate the area in which you are working quite well, but it does not provide you with good depth perception. So make sure to look around. Be aware of what is going on around you and what the fire is doing. Keep track of all escape routes and safety zones. Last but not least, do not become separated from your crew. These safety messages can be applied to every type of firefighting, not just wildland. Their main focus is that you keep informed on what is happening and remain aware of how you are going to seek safe refuge. Do not become so intent on extinguishing the fire that you do not consider where it is going and what damage it has caused to trees and structures, which may fall on you if you are not careful. Now let's do a little overview. Wildland-urban interface firefighting is becoming more common as more people leave the cities and build homes in the foothills and mountainous areas. Firefighters can no longer afford to just back off a couple of ridges, create a fire break, and wait for the fire to get there. Now, the firefighters must place themselves and their equipment in the path of the advancing fire, such as you see in example 14-12 as shown below. The main objective is to protect as many structures as possible. This is primarily done by placing a pumper at each structure. In areas of dry brush and trees, Flame lengths can easily exceed 50 feet. Firefighters do not have the capability to stop this type of fire in a direct frontal assault. There are several things to consider when assessing your ability to protect a structure and provide for your own safety. Determine your water needs versus the availability of water at the scene. Perform structure triage to determine whether the structure is truly defendable based on its construction, type, roof covering, proximity to the fuel, and topography. Make a fair evaluation of what is to be protected and the probability of a successful outcome. Determine whether it is truly safe to take the action that you are considering. When the decision is made to attempt to save the structure from the advancing fire, the following safety considerations should be followed. Have a planned and understood escape route that is constantly reevaluated to be sure that it is available. Park your engine on the side of the structure away from the advancing fire to protect it from radiant heat. Keep in communication with your crew and surrounding crews. Plan for the possibility of being overrun and use the cab of the engine or the structure you are protecting as a safe refuge. Keep at least 100 gallons in the engine water tank for your own protection. Keep headlights on, windows rolled up, and outside radio speakers turned up so you can hear a warning of advancing fire. Coil a charged 1.5-inch line at the engine for engine protection. Stay as mobile as possible for rapid escape. Keep structure protection lines short. Let me repeat that. Keep structure protection lines short. Use water only as necessary. Never compromise crew safety to protect property. It is always the other way around. Human life above all other considerations. In these safety messages, great emphasis is placed on maintaining communications. A coordinated attack cannot be implemented without good communications among resource groups. Informed as to what incident is doing and what action to take when things go wrong is paramount. So make sure that you are always well informed so you know exactly how the incident is behaving and then what action that you can take when things go wrong. Have more than one plan of action. Now let's do some overview. In areas with oil production or refining, oil firefighting is a skill that needs to be developed. An example of such firefighting is below in figure 14-13. The primary objectives in oil firefighting are to extinguish the fire and control the sources of any leaks. Fire props at oil firefighting schools are designed so that firefighters advance hose lines toward the burning product and push it away from them. Once at the burning flange or pipe, the valve is closed to shut off the flow. This technique is sometimes used to control plumbing fires. Often, a refinery employee can shut down the leak from a location remote from the fire, and the fire department's job is to confine the fire and protect exposures until the fuel remaining in the pipe burns itself out. In refinery fires, many different products can be encountered and each has a different burning characteristic. On the receiving side, the product is crude oil, which is very viscous and thick. It is then refined into lighter products such as diesel, fuel, gasoline, and kerosene, etc. The lightest product of these is hydrogen gas. Hydrogen gas burns so cleanly that often the flame is completely invisible. It is possible for a firefighter to walk into the jet of a burning hydrogen gas without seeing it. You should project a hose stream out in front or even use a regular broom held out in front of you to help search out a hydrogen flame. Generally, firefighters should be accompanied by refinery employees anytime they enter the refinery for firefighting purposes. It is dangerous to shut off valves or attempt other mitigation efforts without proper guidance and expertise. Different methods are used when fire occurs in a storage tank. In a storage tank fire, only the surface is burning. Although these types of fires may appear to be easy to control because the surface area is contained by the walls of the tank, pouring water into the tank at a high rate will not extinguish the fire. Much of the water will be turned to steam by the heat of the fire, and oil floats on water, leading to three main problems in this type of firefighting: boil over, slop over, and froth over. Boil over occurs when water is trapped under the surface of the oil. This layer of water is called a lens because of its shape. As the oil surface burns, a heat wave travels downward through the oil at a rate of 12 to 48 inches per hour. When this heat wave hits a lens of water, it turns the water into steam. When the water is turned into vapor, it begins to expand, and this expansion causes the oil to erupt upward, potentially ejecting from the tank. Slop over occurs when fire streams are applied to the burning liquid surface at such an angle that hot and/or burning oil is forced over the edge of the tank. The oil then flows down the side of the tank, resulting in a fire on the ground as well as one in the tank. Froth over occurs when fire streams are directed at an angle that plunges under the surface of the burning oil. This would most likely occur if the water were applied from an elevated stream device such as a ladder truck. As the water enters the surface, it turns to steam, much like the boil over, and the surface is turned to burning oil froth. This froth can easily overflow the walls of the tank and spread as a ground fire. In tanks with a cone roof and vapor space above the contents, subsurface foam injection plumbing is often provided. An illustration of this is below in Figure 14-14. The foam generating equipment is hooked to a manifold on the tank, and foam is pumped in until the fire is extinguished. Other tanks may have a system of piping that extends up the outside of the tank. The foam generating equipment is then attached to the product extinguishing the fire. When neither of these is provided, the foam must be applied by aerial apparatus or from the ground through large bored nozzles that can project a stream over a wall of the tank. In some cases, the nozzle is mounted to fixed plumbing for tank protection. An example of this is below in figure 14-15. Throwing a ladder on the outside of the tank to gain access to the surface is extremely dangerous and not recommended. If other tanks are endangered by the radiated heat of the fire, they may be cooled with water spray. The water must be applied directly onto the tank shell. Setting up a water curtain to absorb radiated heat in the air is ineffective. Most modern storage tanks are of the floating roof type. The roof floats directly on the product, which reduces the vapor space inside the tank itself. The most common fire is the seal area between the floating lid and the tank shell, and this is demonstrated below in figure 14-16. When large amounts of water are pumped onto the lid, it can cause it to sink, increasing the burning surface area greatly. The two methods most commonly used on a seal fire are attack lines using a foam or dry chemical extinguishers. If the tank is equipped with a plumbing system for foam application, it should be designed with a dam to keep the foam applied over the area of the seal. Now let's talk about gasoline spills. The mass release of gasoline or any other flammable liquid requires that the vapors be controlled if it can be done in a safe manner. Class B foam is the agent of choice for this operation, though it is not effective on all Class B materials. When Class B foam is properly applied, it can seal the liquid surface so that the flammable vapors are contained and ignition of the vapors is prevented. Class B foam must be periodically reapplied because it will break down after a time and become ineffective in controlling the vapors. Anytime Class B foam is used on a petroleum spill, firefighters should not enter the area of the spill. Walking through the foam blanket breaks the seal and releases the flammable vapors. If the vapors find an ignition source, you will be surrounded by flames. Although the natural reaction is to run in this situation, this just disrupts the foam blanket further and makes the situation much worse. If you must walk through the foam, shuffle your feet slowly to allow the foam to reseal as you move. Do not pick up your feet as you walk. If you must pick up your feet to go over an obstacle, lift them up and put them down slowly. Also try to keep hand lines down out of the foam blanket. The best course is to stand back and lob the foam to where it needs to go. This helps prevent breaking the foam blanket. Now let's talk about liquefied petroleum gas. This is a commonly used byproduct of oil refining that is liquefied petroleum gas, also known as LPG. It includes products such as butane and propane, among many others. The storage containers for these products are of a steel shell that is welded together. They are easily recognizable by their hemispherical ends, and they may be of many different sizes. They are either mounted on the ground, carried on trains, or mounted on trucks and trailers in the larger sizes. You will also see them on large shipping vessels as well. These containers can also be found in backyard barbecues, forklifts, travel trailers, motorhomes, propane-powered vehicles, and garages. The tanks are built to withstand high pressures above that of the working pressure of the tank. They are equipped with a relief valve on the top that should keep them from ever reaching the tank's burst capacity. This works well under normal conditions. However, in an earthquake, tornado, and floods, the tanks become dislodged from their mountings or moorings if they are stowed by a dock. In vehicle accidents, the truck or train-mounted structural integrity compromised from the tank skidding along the ground or striking another solid object can occur. When one of these containers is involved in a fire, the recommendation is that large volumes of water be applied at each point of flame contact. The volume is determined by the size of the fire and the number of containers involved. One concern with these types of fires is the potential for the fire to evolve into a boiling liquid expanding vapor explosion, or BLEVE. When the fire is burning from the relief valve on top of the tank, the container is heated from radiated heat. As the container is heated, the rate of gas release increases, which intensifies the fire, then in turn heats the container at a faster rate. Steel starts to weaken as it is heated. When the pressure in the container increases to the point where it overcomes the strength of the weakened steel, the container shell will separate, releasing the contents. An example below is 14-17, and you can see gas cylinders that are distorted and ruptured from heat and fire. When a flammable gas is involved, the release creates a vapor cloud that ignites from the fire, causing a rupture. The resultant cloud of flaming material and heat and shock waves have tremendous destructive potential. Anyone in the immediate area has very little chance of survival. When fighting fires involving containers with a flammable BLEVE potential, water should be applied with remotely supplied master stream appliances. Many facilities are set up with large nozzles for this purpose. On the roadway, these are not going to be readily available. When personnel set up appliances, they should get them set up and get out of the area as quickly as possible. Container pieces have been known to fly as far as 1/2 mile from the explosion site. A BLEVE can also occur in a non-flammable liquid. Any container that has liquid contents and will withstand a pressure rise inside before it bursts can BLEVE. When a can of creamed corn explodes in a kitchen fire, the same forces are at work. Not all flammable gas releases are caused by or result in fires. LPG can be released because of mechanical failure of plumbing or because of human error. Now let's talk about natural gas. Natural gas is a common flammable gas, and it poses little hazard when released into the open because it is lighter than air and will disperse itself. However, it has the potential for collecting in structures when leaks occur in interior mounted gas meters and plumbing. Now let's talk about natural gas. When gas lines are cut Any leakage of gas should be handled strictly by the gas company. Pull and charge an attack line just in case static electricity causes ignition, but have the line shut down immediately and do not restart it until the source of the gas is turned off and any remaining gas is dispersed. A person who's bent on suicide might release natural gas or LPG into a structure. Any gas smell incident should be treated as a true emergency with life-threatening potential. The worst scenario is the cloud of flammable gas that is not yet ignited. Now let's talk about hazmat incident or hazardous materials incidents. Hazardous materials incidents are becoming more common. Be alert for the presence of hazardous materials in every situation. Here you see a diagram of firefighters operating at a hazardous materials incident. All employees and employers must follow the requirements of OSHA 29 CFR Part 1910 TAC 20. Part 1910 TAC 20 requires training to at least the first responder level for employees responding to hazardous materials incidents, annual refresher training, and the establishment of an ICS on any incident involving hazardous materials. With hazardous materials incidents, you want to always take a precautionary approach. All approaches should be made from upwind, uphill, and upstream. Involve as few firefighters as possible, and the initial responsibility is to isolate, identify, and then deny entry. Perimeters are set up to control the access of personnel to the scene. Only properly equipped and trained personnel should be allowed into the exclusionary or hot zone. Proper recognition and identification must take place before hot zone entry. A secondary zone is set up around the hot zone. Anyone who passes from the hot zone to the warm zone is to be properly decontaminated. Non-essential personnel stay out in the cold zone. Victims should be brought out of the hot zone and decontaminated before they are turned over to EMS. We saw this diagram just a little bit earlier, but here it is again. EMS personnel should not be allowed to enter the hot zone unless they have proper training and PPE. And here you see the three zones broken down. You see the hot zone, which is the most immediate area of hazard. And then you see the warm zone, which is the decontamination corridor. And then the cold zone, which is where your incident commander is located, your command post is located, and you also want to make sure that this cold zone is established so that it is upwind. Also in the cold zone, you're going to see various pieces of equipment staged and located as well. Identify the material involved to decide the level of hazard and how it should be handled. Material information can be gathered from the U.S. DOT's Emergency Response Guidebook, Chemtrek, the manufacturer, and computer databases. Now, let's talk a little bit more about hazardous materials incidents, and specifically we're going to talk about burming. Burming contains the flow of a material from the area of a leak. It's constructed from dirt or other readily available materials. In this diagram, you see a firefighter diking a spill to help contain liquid material. Now let's talk about diverting. Diverting directs the flow of a hazardous material that cannot be contained in a berm because of the amount or availability of berming materials. And then controlling is the aspect of stopping or reducing the flow rate of the leak itself. Many specially designed leak control devices should be used only by trained personnel. Once the incident is under the control and the source of the leak is stopped, the cleanup phase begins. Typically, this is done by private companies or private contractors who specialize in this type of operation. Now let's discuss weapons of mass destruction. Terrorist CBRNE incident conditions include crime scenes, a major interaction with local, state, and federal agencies. There will be some scene information overload, some sense of chaos, an overwhelming of resources, possible secondary devices, and pre-incident indicators where the terrorist or terrorist groups will call ahead and give advance warning about a potential attack. Terrorist CBRNE incident conditions continued include deliberate attack, super toxic materials, identification of material used, mass casualties with many fatalities, psychological effects, mass decontamination, and unusual risk to emergency responders and civilians. Now let's talk about emergency medical service operations. Fire departments have become much more involved in providing EMS. Operations include first aid, basic life support, and extrication from vehicles. Firefighters must avoid exposure to bloodborne and airborne pathogens. Let's talk about emergency medical service operations. Part 29 CFR 1910 TAC 1030 is the occupational exposure to bloodborne pathogens. It identifies emergency response personnel as Category 1 employees and identifies them at the greatest risk of occupational exposure to communicable disease. NFPA 1581 is the standard on fire department infection control program. It defines minimum requirements and criteria and includes recommendations on fire department facilities, personnel, PPE, and procedures for cleaning, disinfecting, and disposal. When responding to EMS incidents, personnel should be provided with special PPE. There should be a liquid-proof barrier, and this should be placed between the firefighter and the victim, and this helps prevent the victim's body fluids from coming into contact with the firefighter. Two terms used to describe this PPE system are universal precautions and body substance isolation. Turnout gear is equipped with a vapor barrier inside the flame-resistant outer shell. There are also included properly rated gloves that can be worn under leather gloves. Remember always that gloves must be changed between victims to prevent cross-contamination. Bag up any materials that have become contaminated in a biohazard container once the incident is concluded. This is an example of a biohazard container for infectious waste. Check the bottom of your boots for contamination. We talked a little bit about that before. And be cautious when working around paramedics, as they will likely be starting IV lines, which means that there is a good possibility of blood being spilled on the floor, etc. Some other precautions to stay in good health. Do not report to work sick, eat a good diet, wash your hands well and often, especially after incidents, and approach every victim with caution as if he or she has a deadly infection. Now let's discuss highway incident safety. The 3 E's of highway survival: eye on traffic, exposure, and escape route. Always don all appropriate protective equipment, including fire-resistant clothing and vest. 2 excellent sources of information concerning traffic and roadway safety are: 1. The Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, and 2. The Emergency Vehicle Safety Initiative FA-272. Now let's talk about vehicle accidents in particular. First, consider the dangers of spilled fuel. Next, apparatus should be parked uphill of the accident. If you must work in an area with spilled fuel to rescue a victim, the spill should be covered with a Class B foam. A firefighter should be designated to stay with an attack line. New hazards exist with the introduction of hybrid and electric vehicles. High voltage batteries that contain chemical hazards, high voltage cables running throughout the vehicle, keyless engines which make it difficult to determine whether the car is actually off, and high strength steel that is tougher to cut or bend. Working with power tools to extricate accident victims involves exercising caution to protect yourself and the victims, and do not use power tools where there is spilled fuel in the immediate area. Loose trim metal should be removed first when using the power shears. Vehicle fires can be described as structure fires with wheels. They have all of, if not more than, the hazards of a structure fire. They should be approached from the side or from a 45-degree angle, and the firefighters should don full PPE, including SCBA. Cars do not generally blow up in a fire, but the seams of a gas tank can let go, spilling forth a large amount of burning fuel. This is an example of a firefighter operating at a vehicle fire. Both of these firefighters should be wearing their SCBA face masks, and you can see one is and one isn't. So in this case, they both absolutely should be. Now let's talk about aircraft firefighting. Aircraft are encountered by firefighters in numerous situations, such as an emergency incident or as a tool. When an aircraft crashes or catches fire, it can present many different hazards. The first priority is to create a path. Entry is made into the body of the aircraft. To rescue anyone alive inside is the immediate goal, and to complete extinguishment of the fire is the secondary goal. Make sure that you always overhaul the fire scene. Now let's talk about EMS and firefighting with aircraft. Helicopters, rotary wing aircraft are used for transportation of victims on emergency medical incidents and tactical and logistical needs on other types of incidents. To continue with EMS and firefighting with aircraft, here are some rules for working around helicopters. Approach and depart helicopters from the side or front in a highly crouched position, from the downhill side to avoid the main rotor, and in the pilot's field of vision. Do not go anywhere near the tail rotor. Rules for working around helicopters continued. Use a chin strap or secure your headgear, hard hat, when working under the main rotor. Carry tools horizontally beneath waist level to avoid contact with the main rotor. Fasten your seat belt when you enter the helicopter and refasten it when you leave. And use the door latches as instructed. Make sure that you remember that the rotors can dip as low as 4 feet from the ground. So you want to make sure that you are well aware of the rotors, well aware of the range of the rotors, and well aware of your relation to the rotors. Use caution around windows, antennas, and any moving parts. When entering or exiting a helicopter, step on the skid. Anytime you ride in a helicopter in a wildland fire situation, you must wear full PPE. Do not throw articles from the helicopter. Precautions to consider when setting up a landing zone for a helicopter. Secure all loose articles in the area. Perform dust abatement by wetting down the area. And make sure vehicle and pedestrian traffic is stopped if the helicopter is to land on a roadway. Precautions to consider when setting up a landing zone continued. When a main or tail rotor hits a vehicle, the helicopter is out of service and unable to fly. If a rotor hits a person, it will most likely kill the person and disable the helicopter. Make sure to wear eye and hearing protection when working around helicopters. Some precautions to consider when setting up a landing zone are to roll up the windows on any vehicles in the area to prevent debris from flying into the vehicles. Plus, if someone's sitting in a vehicle, they don't need debris flying into the car and whipping around on the inside of the car. It can cause serious physical harm. Also, provide for plenty of clearance for the helicopter to land, and keep unnecessary personnel well out of the safety circle. When the helicopter is coming in to land, there are several updates the pilot should receive. Contact with any moving part on an aircraft is often fatal. Do not touch anything until you are briefed on its use. And do not approach the aircraft until given permission by a crew member or the pilot. On wildland incidents, helicopters are used for dropping water and fire retardant on the fire itself. This poses various hazards. Helicopters are used to sling load materials to crews on the fire line, and airplanes, which are fixed-wing aircraft, are used to drop fire retardant at wildland fires. A technical rescue involves incidents that employ the use of tools and skills that exceed those of the fire department's normal duties. Some examples are firefighting, EMS, and rescue. These technical rescue aspects can be performed in various situations, including rope rescue, both high and low angle, swift water rescue, confined space rescue, caves and mines, pipe rescues, well rescues, and storage tank rescues. Now let's talk a bit more about aircraft firefighting. This involves technical rescue, and all of these rescue types require specialized equipment and very specific training. Rescuers without the proper training and equipment can become victims themselves. Now, let's talk about decision making. Any discussion of safety has to include decision making. To keep ourselves and those around us safe, we must review and understand how we make decisions. Proper decision making leads to safer, more efficient operations at incidents, and the first decision that must be made correctly is that safety is absolutely the first priority. All firefighters must think first and act second. Now, to continue with decision making, let's talk about crew resource management. CRM, or crew resource management, is based on the following 5 elements: communication, situational awareness, decision making, teamwork, and barriers. Now we'll discuss the 2 and 7 tool. The 2 errors are underestimating hazards and using inadequate safety measures, and failing to notice changing conditions and adjust tactics. The 7 barriers are inexperience, getting too comfortable, distraction from primary duty, priorities out of order, social influences, stress reactions, and physical impairment. Now let's summarize everything we covered in this chapter. We talked about personnel types. We also discussed the 16 firefighting life safety initiatives. Make sure that you review these. The assignment of rapid intervention crews, or RICs. We also discussed the 2 in, 2 out rule. As far as structural firefighting, we discussed offensive, defensive, and combination attack modes. And we talked about the limitations of protective equipment. Continuing with our review of structural firefighting, we talked about high-rise buildings, electrical hazards, pets, and fire department operations at sprinklered occupancies. Further, we discussed fires involving electrical distribution equipment and installations. Now, we also talked about wildland firefighting, LCES and FLCES Delta. Make sure that you look up, look down, and look around. And then we, at further points, discuss the wildland urban interface intermix firefighting, which has become more and more prevalent in recent years. We talked about petroleum firefighting, specifically gasoline spills, liquefied petroleum gas, and natural gas. We talked about hazardous materials incidents, weapons of mass destruction, and emergency medical service operations. And remember, I'm only highlighting these here. It is up to you to go through and take each of these points and study them in detail and review them in detail so that you are so very familiar with them that you end up falling back on your training should a situation that's complex arise. We also talked about the 3 E's of highway incident survival. And we discussed vehicle accidents, specifically vehicle fires. We also discussed aircraft firefighting and EMS and firefighting with aircraft and technical rescue. We also talked about decision making, crew resource management, and the 2 and 7 tool. Now class, this was the last chapter of a very long course, so please make sure, as I've restated with every chapter, be sure to review everything in detail. Make sure that you're completely familiar with it. If you have any questions or concern, or you're confused about anything, absolutely do not hesitate to approach your instructor and gain clarification. Now's the time to gain that clarification. You don't want to find yourself in a situation where you're fighting a fire or you're in a complex rescue situation and you think to yourself, gee, I wish I'd asked that question. That's not the position to find yourself in. It's not a comfortable place to be. So, again, please make sure you approach your instructor with any concerns, issues, or questions, or if you need any type of clarification. Thank you for all your time and attention in this very difficult course, and we look forward to seeing you in future courses.